Don't ever slow up my line.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you might have missed at Andor, Episode 8, Narkina 5. This episode continues to immerse us into the Star Wars galaxy, showing the consequences of the Aldhani heist on just regular people, prisoners, and even on the Coruscant elite. Also, Forest Whittaker, with probably one day of filming, gives us a franchise-high monologue.
They're lost! All of them lost!
So, let's break this down. We begin with Andor being unjustly detained. Now, he may not have committed the crimes they accused him of, but he is the one who stirred up this hornet's nest to begin with. This whole prison storyline is brilliant because it shows Cassian that there are consequences to him fighting for himself. If he would have joined the rebellion instead of running off with his share, then he would not be in prison. He's being processed by the shore troopers, the specialized troopers that we first saw in Rogue One and who were patrolling Space Miami Beach in the last episode. Not only does Cassian lose his freedom, but he also lost all of his credits, which some hotel worker will probably find stashed above the shower. So it was all for nothing. And this is showing him that when you try to live life under the Empire, you will always suffer, unless you are one of the elites. And to underscore this, his time in prison is intercut with Mon Mothma's party, but more on that in a bit. As prisoners are being processed, one of the planets mentioned is Belsarvis. Now, this planet was briefly mentioned in the High Republic novels, but in the Old Legends continuity, it was an ice planet featured in the Old Republic comics and the New Jedi Order novels. As Cassian is being sent to prison, we cut to Cyril in a prison of his own, his office job. ISB agents come through because apparently Cyril's been snooping around about Andor, even filing false inquiries saying that he did things like misappropriated fuel. So we're actually seeing a common theme here with Dedra, Cyril, Luthen, Vel, and Cinta, that none of them can let anything go. They are all obsessive with their missions, and they want to tie up the same loose end. Cassian Andor. Whereas other people just want to sweep events under the rug, like Dedra's rival Blevin, who lied in his report to make the whole event on Ferrix look clean, so he could take credit for a job well done.
Criminal negligence of my commanding officer, the total lack of imperial authority on Ferrix.
Hey Doug, what kind of baby do you think a dragonborn and a demigod would make?
I don't know. What kind of baby would the
The answer is an all-powerful dragon demigod, which will be the heir to my house.
Oh, you're playing that game again.
Yes, I have been playing Bloodline Heroes of Lithis, and they're the sponsor of this video. This action RPG is different from any other fantasy game that I've played. To make your house stronger, you have to marry different bloodlines, so their offspring will have a combination of different skills. So this system creates more than 800 characters with unique skills and appearances. Then those skills get passed down throughout the family trees and merged into one being.
Oh, that's wizard.
And I'm very excited for the Halloween event where they're going to introduce a new lineage called the Accursed. Now, this is an undead clan that rose up among the Dark Elves after their homeland was destroyed, and they have an insatiable thirst for blood.
Vampires?
Uh-huh. This Halloween event starts October 27th, and if you play every day, you get a vampire champion for free on the 7th day. This is on top of all the other characters in the game that you can create yourself, and you can also rehabilitate prisoners to bring them over to your side. But I also really like sim games, so along the way, you're building up your kingdom and economy. Plus, it's vertical, so it's easier to hold your phone when you play.
Oh, I bet that game is expensive.
Not at all, Doug. It's free. You can scan this QR code or click my link in the description to download Bloodline Heroes of Lithis. If you do, you'll get a special starter pack that has a $20 value. In-game rewards include 10 energy potions, 100,000 gold, and 100 diamonds. Download now, and back to the Easter eggs.
Hey, did you get a haircut?
Yes, in some shots, I have short hair. Meanwhile, Cassian is taken to an underwater prison, much like Fortress Inquisitorius, where the Sith Inquisitors take Force-sensitive people that we saw in Obi-Wan in the game Jedi Fallen Order. Ironic that Dedra ignites a search for Cassian when he's already in Imperial custody. She's appealing to Wolf Yularen for funds. Now, he was in the last episode, but we first saw him here in A New Hope, and throughout the Clone Wars series as a Republic commander. It's kind of funny how in the 1970s they cast like a random English guy with a mustache to wear a white tunic in the background, and now like we're still talking about that character. So Dedra has worked out that Chekhov's stolen Starpath unit traces back to a rebel operative codenamed Axis, so named because Luthen is at the center of so many different rebel operations. Seeing the ISS have to jockey for funding also reminded me an awful lot of the Baltimore police in the show The Wire, and how they had to fight for Hunting to get that titular wiretap. In the prison, we learn that Cassian and the other prisoners have to go barefoot, while the Imperials get these big, heavy boots. Now, this has a practical use with the electrified floor, but it's also a status symbol. Having nice footwear is an indication of high status, while people going barefoot are seen as poor or even primitive. Lance Scientists on Twitter also pointed out that the colors of the prison uniforms are also similar to the colors that we see the Lothal prison workers wear in the show Star Wars Rebels. So we're starting to get the feeling that the Emperor's Pord decree had actually nothing to do with Aldhani, and that the Empire just wanted more slave labor. The Aldhani heist was a convenient excuse for them to implement an order that they had already written up. So we go from Cassian back to Syril, who's in another type of cell as he tries to stand up for himself.
I didn't deserve what happened.
And you know what, Syril? Neither did Cassian. I like the extra detail they put into showing how prisoners in the Empire are not even regarded as people. They're given minimum instructions, and when Cassian arrives, he actually gets all these conflicting orders.
Right, step forward, let's go, move. Step forward and stop, now move. Stop.
Now, this is in contrast to the treatment of prisoners in the High Republic novels, which are set like 300 years before this. In Republic prisons, like the one in the audio drama Tempest Runner, the goal of prison ships is to rehabilitate people. In that story, the prisoners are also given work to do, just like in the Empire. But the prisoners in the Republic era are given jobs to repair the damage they've caused, as a way to atone for their crimes. Whereas in Andor, the prisoners are probably building parts for the Death Star.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense. In the Thrawn novels and in Rogue One, we see that the Death Star is constantly running behind schedule, so the Emperor could have passed Pord to recruit slaves into the Emperor's pet project. Now, the prison itself is like something straight out of a 1970s sci-fi dystopian movie like Logan's Run.
We've gone far enough. I think we're safe from the corporation here.
Especially with this like heavy synthesizer score. But this prison has to be an homage to the dystopian 70s sci-fi movie, George Lucas's first feature, THX 1138. In that movie, people are assigned numbers, they wear white jumpsuits where they work different shifts, they travel through these big white tunnels, and they have their individuality stripped away from them. And then, hey, we meet Kino Loy, played by Andy Serkis, returning to Star Wars after this happened. He gives Cassian a run-through of how their little community works.
There you go, table 5.
Table 5, table 5.
And hey, look who it is, Melshi from Rogue One.
Her?
Melshi, man. He rescued Jyn Erso from a prison ship and was with Cassian like all the way through the movie. He and Cassian died on Scarif, killed by the Death Star. Ironic, since that's probably what they're actually building here.
Oh, yeah, the Death Star, yeah.
You know, building parts for the Empire is actually a lot like making Easter egg videos for YouTube. We're always comparing ourselves against the other tables. And then we cut back to Mon Mothma's party, where she has lost her taste for having a worm drink. Now, this is a neat symbolic touch, because this worm has to die just so a rich person can enjoy their drink. It's symbolic of how the Empire treats life so carelessly, and symbolic of Mon Mothma's higher moral ground. Her old friend Tay shows up, and by the way, these two are I'm sure of it. Last episode, when she revealed her rebel activity, she said,
I want to tell you something that only 3 people in the galaxy know about.
Or who are the other 3 people?
Well, Luthen, his assistant Leda, and Bail Organa. Bail Organa was one of the original senators that she first formed a secret opposition committee with.
Do you think he'll dismantle the Senate?
Why bother? As a practical matter, the Senate no longer exists.
And in the show Rebels, we saw that he was instrumental in organizing the early Rebel Alliance. If he hadn't died, he probably would have been leader of the rebellion instead of Mon Mothma. Now, she mentions the Emperor's latest overreach, referring to the tight restrictions of Pord, and her charities to combat this are probably trying to get legal counsel for the slaves.
Oh, I don't like that word.
Sorry, prisoners with jobs. And we're starting to see the cracks in Mon Mothma's marriage, as she finally recalls when her husband was not a D.
Do you remember Farron at 15?
Oh, that's not.
The Academy Firebrand.
And later, they refer to their view from their window as a metaphor for their marriage.
Well, that's always the way, isn't it? One forgets to savor the familiar.
Now, the view, of course, is also symbolic of their wealth and power, because the wealthiest people live in skyscrapers, while the poor people live below. And if you're middle class like Syril, you live in Midtown. This same symbolism is represented in the prison, which talks about different levels and the top table versus the low table. Even though this is a party, it's actually work for Mon Mothma, a way for her to grease the wheels and get votes.
I always forget you're Chandler at heart.
And I always forget how sweet you are when you're looking for votes.
So we keep intercutting between 2 very different work gatherings, prison workers and the elites who put them in that prison. We pointed out last week that the Pord legislation has many similarities to the American Patriot Act, but it actually falls just short of martial law. While people like Cassian and Melshi are suffering from this, the elites are able to debate it with drinks in their hands.
The Emperor's primary charge is to protect us, is it not?
And that, for me, is one of the key lines of this episode. Dictators often use fear, unrest, and war to rise to power, with the excuse that they are needed to keep the people safe and keep law and order. Palpatine used the Clone Wars to rise to power, and now he's using the rebellion to stay in power.
Those who give up some of their liberty in order to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety.
And we can see the rebellion growing in very small places, even in the prison, where people on different floors use hand signals to communicate. The other prisoners with jobs press Cassian for details on the robbery, and he plays dumb. And this is where Melshi introduces himself with some really good advice.
Don't ever look at the number. Double, triple, it doesn't matter.
Hey!
You're in till they don't want you anymore.
Enough!
Get straight with that.
So he's telling Cassian that their little community here is a lie. The Empire constructs these rules to keep people working to give them false hope of a release. But they're only here as worker units, not as people who are working off a sentence. Now this is very similar to the freemen in the 1860s and 70s. These were liberated slaves who were given plots of land to work, 40 acres and a mule. But the banks created a system where the families would always be in debt, essentially re-enslaving them with poverty. Now it's also important to note that most of the elites at Mon Mothma's party are humans. The Empire is extremely prejudiced against non-humans, so worlds representing alien cultures just don't have as much sway or power within the Senate. Then we flash forward about 30 days as Cassian has turned his crew around and they've gone from worst to first. So we shift back to Ferrix, where Cassian's friends and family are suffering because of his actions. Marva hurt her leg trying to be a rebel.
She's obsessed with troopers. She fell trying to pry open the Aldrich's floodgate.
And you know, I'm actually starting to see a lot of parallels to this show in a great movie, The Shawshank Redemption. Marva's monologue in the last episode is along the same lines of Andy Dufresne talking about how the memory of music gives him hope.
They can't touch. It's yours. What are you talking about? Hope.
Later, there's another parallel with the dead prisoner. Now, the callous way they treat this suicide also echoes when a man is beaten by guards in Shawshank.
And it's fat ass by a nose!
This series is so grounded, they even talk about space nursing homes.
What about the daughters of Ferrix? She's a past president.
Now, Bix is with Brasso. Remember that he was Cassian's alibi the day after he killed those two corporate workers.
You can buy for me, but I wasn't there. So then you started home and you saw me at the hotel breach.
We also see that Val and Cinta are on Ferrix keeping watch for Cassian, and as we find out, they are together. Now, as far as I can remember, this is actually the first queer couple we've seen in live-action Star Wars, apart from these two kissing in Rise of Skywalker. And, you know, those two just could have been like really good buddies.
You're gay.
Obviously, I'm not gay.
Well, it's not so obvious.
I give it to you. You got me there.
Later, to show the connection and distance between Vel and Cinta, we got this sweet crossfade to show that they're together, yet apart.
Like planes in the sky.
Now, in this conversation, Cinta comes off as way more dedicated to the cause than Vel.
I told you up front. The struggle will always come first. We take what's left.
This is because troopers killed her family, as we found out a couple episodes ago.
Should have been here when Cinta found out. They slaughtered her whole family.
Bix and Pac talk about how losing the hotel was not very good for business.
What hotel?
Well, the Empire turned the local hotel into their HQ.
I was asking if this would do as your headquarters.
This is another example of their careless colonialism. They chose this building because it was large, and they didn't care how it affected the local economy.
They took our jobs!
So, Bix contacts Luthen, and okay, as always, there are a lot of Easter eggs all over his shop. I feel like every episode we see like a new corner of the shop that shows us something new. So, I'm going to run through all the Easter eggs in this episode that we've already spotted and pointed out in last episodes, just in case you haven't watched every single breakdown that we've done so far. This is a Gungan shield from the Phantom Menace, the Mask of a Jedi Temple Guard here, and just behind that, the Starkiller armor from Force Unleashed. And this chest piece is armor from a Mandalorian, and of course, these spiked hands belong to your mom. So, the second half of this episode concentrates on people in 3 different types of prisons. There's the literal prisons, holding Cassian, the people in Ferrix who are imprisoned by poverty and the Imperial garrison, and finally there's Saw Gererra, imprisoned by his own fanaticism.
A bit of a luxury, I'd argue, to a man who's hiding in cold caves and begging for spare parts.
The highlight of this episode was Luthen's visit to Saw. Outside, we see Bentich from Rogue One standing guard beside a Z-95 Headhunter, the precursor to the X-Wing. Now this alludes to Saw's air power that Luthen mentions later on. Forest Whittaker is magnificent in this scene. So here's a quick backstory on Saw Gererra. During the Clone Wars, he was a partisan fighter on his home planet, rebelling against the Separatist occupation. He was even trained by Ahsoka Tano and Anakin Skywalker.
Don't give up. Learning this could save your life and those around you.
Now, his sister died during the war, which really hardened his heart. After the war, he leads a small band of people to live a life away from the Empire, which we briefly saw in the Bad Batch. And he also appears in Star Wars Rebels, where he tries to exterminate the Geonosians.
You know better than anyone, we can't underestimate these things.
Now, at this point in the war, Saw is still optimistic. At least he's in a good mood today. Notice that he hasn't been maimed by war yet, like we saw he was in Rogue One. Saw's partisans have always been far more violent and extreme than the other rebel cells, so much so that they were basically denounced by the rebellion.
But Saw Gererra is an extremist. His militancy
has caused the Alliance a great many problems.
But what I love about this scene is that it really spells out how hard it was to form the Rebel Alliance. Luthen wants the Empire to crack down even more to wake people up. He's hoping that that would cause all these various factions to band together into a single alliance. As Ben Franklin once said, if we don't hang together, we shall surely hang separately. Now Saw has this great monologue where he talks about these various cells and how they can never work together. He mentions separatists, those are holdouts from the Clone Wars, neo-republicans, people who want to reestablish the Republic who would never get along with the separatists, the Gorman Front, referring to the repressed people of Gorman, that's the planet that Mon Mothma is advocating for in this series and in Rebels.
This is a boot to the throats of all Gormans, who've done nothing more than request their basic rights.
He also mentions the Partisan Alliance, banding together small groups like his, the Sectorists, who are probably people who think the galaxy should be controlled by small local governments divided up by sector, human cultists, probably the space version of the Ku Klux Klan, and galaxy partitioners.
They're lost! All of them, lost!
This monologue is great because it's spelling out the hard work that Mon Mothma and Bail Organa had to do. Up until now, the earliest moment we've seen the Rebel Alliance on screen is when they show up at the end of the first season of Star Wars Rebels, and the Ghost crew learn that they're part of a wider network of fighters.
There are other cells.
We're a cell?
So this meeting is one of the starting points for that moment. Meanwhile, Dedra gets her hands on Bix after she screwed up and tried to send a signal to Luthen. My guess is next episode Bix will be rescued by Vel and Cinta, and then they'll take her into the rebellion. And just one final note, the weirdest thing about this episode is that I actually got invested on whether or not Cassian was going to get first in his shift, but the episode cuts away before we find out, because it doesn't matter. It's all just a ploy by the Empire, a meaningless award to keep the people from rebelling. I'm betting though, the next episode, Cassian and Melshi put their heads together, escape, and that this prison radicalizes both of them to join the rebellion against the Empire. That's all the Easter eggs we found, but if you found any, let me know in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe or smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.